around as a victim, which I was my whole life. And, there's a great saying, you're not responsible for what happens to you as a child, but as an adult, you're responsible to fix it. And that's what that course was really good for me. If there's one gift that I could give to my extended friends and family and loved ones is if you really want to get to the bottom of what is holding you back in life, this is a really good course to do.
Welcome. On today's episode, my guest is Nicholas X Morley. Nicholas has starred in a documentary that he helped produce called Green Light about medical cannabis. He also was a hair and makeup artist and has worked with the rich and famous in New York, London, Paris and other places. We talk about childhood trauma, narcissistic abuse, plant medicine, psychedelics and the shadow. Join us. So, Nicholas X Morley.
Pietro.
So good. I've been waiting for this for a long time. I was thinking, how am I going to introduce you to my audience? And I'm just going to introduce you as Nicholas X Morley. But I think I want to talk a little bit about how we met, but then I want to hear a bit about you telling your story, your background, a little bit of your life story, because you're one of the most colourful characters I've ever met, and also one of the most adorable. But I'll sing your praises. But we met. I've got to be kind of careful how I frame this as well. But you made a movie, a documentary, a while back.
I was the subject of a documentary.
Oh, that's a better way of putting it.
Yeah.
And I watched that documentary and I thought, wow, this is awesome. This is long overdue. And it was around cannabinoid medicine or cannabis as medicine. And yep. I already was in that realm of understanding cannabis was a medicine long before the rest of the world caught up and it became legal. Mm-hmm. And so you made a movie, and do you want to start there?
I'll give you a quick rundown. So it was a documentary called Green Light, and it was a film made about a friend of mine called Luke and myself. I'd say Luke was actually even more important in that story than I was. It was sort of starring him and I was co-starring, I feel like. However, I sort of helped put it together, and, I met with a young filmmaker out of Melbourne, a guy called Ned Donahue, and a producer called Alexis Eustace, and we spent about 6 months making this film, which was basically a documentary about the work that Luke and I were doing, which was providing people with medicinal cannabis, both CBD and THC, and working within the community and helping people that couldn't get access to these important medicines. The big catch in it all was that we were black marketeers. We were blatantly breaking the law. Because as of then, you couldn't get a script for medicinal cannabis in Australia. So we knew there was a huge need for it, and we basically took it upon ourselves to start supplying people that were in need. And that's what the film was about. It was about taking risks and calculated risks to benefit others. Yeah.
I loved it. I thought it was an awesome doco, and I know Luke as well. And I just thought whoever made that movie did a great job of really representing both of you guys and what you were about. And in some ways, you were pioneers because, like you were saying, you were providing this before you could get a legal script for it. And I thought, wow, these guys are really putting themselves out there. And was there any legal ramifications? Because that was my concern. Like, are you kind of putting a target on your own ass by publishing that doco?
It was really interesting, actually. When we first started making the film, I was living in Burringbar, and I was actually I was growing a considerable amount of cannabis on this property where I was living, and to make medicine out of. And I got busted. So I got raided by the police helicopter, and 3 cars, and a whole little SWAT team came down at 6:30 in the morning and terrified me and a partner that I was living with who was heavily pregnant at the time. So it was all pretty traumatic. But I ended up, having a conversation with the head police officer that was in charge of that. I won't name him, but he was actually a really good guy. And I actually sent him a link to the film when the film came out, because I was very honest with him about what I was doing and why I was growing these plants. And, I explained to him that there was a real need in the community. We weren't selling flour. We were just focusing on medicinal oils. And, our main focus was cancer patients and people who were suffering from chronic pain, kids with epilepsy, Parkinson's, a lot of, really, terrible afflictions that we were getting great results with. We were really helping people. I'm not saying we were curing anybody, but we were definitely making a huge difference in people's lives. And I think, the local enforcement, they sort of understood what we were doing, And I'd also worked with a couple of families in the area where, their loved ones were either police officers or ex-police officers or families of police officers, and they knew what we were doing, I think, and we sort of got a hall pass for a while there, But we always said that when it was going to become legal, then we'd take a step back, and that's something we've both done now.
Yeah, awesome. I actually did a podcast about the legalisation or decriminalisation of drugs with David Halpern recently, and he was talking about the difference between legalisation or decriminalisation, and it sounds like the local police took a decriminalising approach to you, in that they're not saying what you're doing is legal, but we're not going to prosecute you because you're not a drug dealer, you're a community medicine man or whatever, however you see you, a provider of medicinal plant compounds.
Yep.
And, you were ahead of the curve. You're a pioneer because, you were doing this before the medical establishment got on board.
Yeah.
And
there was a lot of other black marketeers that were doing really good jobs. There was the guys at the hemp embassy, and there was a bunch of people.
Michael.
And I've met through the years, I've met a lot of people that were doing similar work to what we were doing. Michael from the hemp embassy was very outspoken, and, they didn't really hide what they were doing either. But I think we were the first ones to actually go on film and say, here we are, this is what we're doing. And, that documentary ended up on Stan, and it was viewed by hundreds of thousands of people. I'll actually have to ask the guys if we can get a link, and we might even be able to put a link to that documentary at the end of this podcast.
That'd be great. And
I'll ask the director.
I didn't know it went that far onto Stan. That's awesome. So congratulations, Nick and Luke. I'd recommend anybody watch that, because you guys were certainly pioneering a field ahead of the medical establishment, and that's not nothing. That's something.
Yeah, and they actually embraced us too. Like both Luke and I did some talks for doctors and hospitals, and we worked a lot with nurses. There's quite a few prominent cancer doctors out there that reached out to us that we know that we've worked with. I'm not going to name any names, but it's fair to say that a lot of doctors out there are actually understanding now how important the medicine is. I also think the whole industry at the moment, the legal industry, is in a pretty weird place. It seems like the prescription side of things is basically an excuse for a whole lot of weed smokers now to get scripts and just smoke weed legally. Like, if you look at the figures, I think there's a lot more flour being handed out via prescription than there is CBD oil and THC oil.
That's interesting. I know one of the local GPs who writes scripts for cannabis, and that's his biggest complaint, is that he sees the most of the people that are coming in are just wanting a prescription for flour so they can legally smoke their pipe.
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, sure.
Yep. I think he's actually left the industry now.
Has he? Okay, probably got fed up. And
there's also the TGA have stepped in, and they've come down hard on a lot of doctors recently, and they've stopped these doctors from prescribing. And then there's also a lot of clinics that are receiving heavy fines now because their advertising and whatever. Like the TGA and the whole guidelines around medicinal cannabis, and the way it's not allowed to be promoted, the guidelines around the marketing and promotion of the product is really, really heavy, which I understand. Look, I lived in the States for a long time. And when I was living in America, if you watch TV in America, every second TV commercial is advertising some sort of drug.
Correct.
Whether it's Pfizer or Advil or whoever it is, right? And America's in a fucking terrible situation now they've got an epidemic of prescription drugs. Now, Australia has very strict laws about advertising any type of prescription medicine, and cannabis falls in under that. So, you know, they are the rules, and I think it needs to be looked at and addressed, but, you know, that's the rules in Australia. You cannot promote or advertise a prescription drug, and that's what it is. It's a scheduled drug now, even though it's a herb.
Yeah, and you're not allowed to make claims about safety or efficacy, effectiveness.
Yep.
And that's why they frown on people advertising or promoting these compounds, because, you know, is anything 100% safe? But I mean, no. But I think CBD, I think that stands out. I mean, I've been a nurse for 30 years. I've given thousands of different medicines to tens of thousands of patients in my lifetime. And not all of those do I think were helpful even to those people, and a lot of them had a lot of side effects. But if I look at the data on CBD, I don't know a medicine that comes close to it in terms of its ability to treat a whole range of conditions and its safety profile. So it's an anticonvulsant, so it can reduce seizures and does. It's an anti-inflammatory.
Yeah, a very good one.
Yeah, it's anti-anxiety. I've seen it stop a panic attack.
So have I.
Yeah, it treats glaucoma. It treats a range of conditions. I won't go into all of them, but there's dozens of different conditions that it treats. And then its safety profile, there's not one documented death ever anywhere in the literature of anybody dying from an overdose of CBD. Yep. The only way you could die from CBD is if a ton of it fell off the back of a truck and landed on your head. So I can't make any claims for its safety or efficacy, and nor am I promoting it, and nor am I selling it. So that's not what I'm up to. I'm just speaking from an experience of, for me, it's the number one best medicine on the planet, CBD. Yep. I actually think no matter what your complaint is, the doctor should be prescribing you CBD first, because it's the safest and it has a range of benefits. Yep. And then if that doesn't work, then add other things in. Yeah, so that's my opinion.
I agree, and I also think that the effects of THC are so much better for you if you are consuming CBD as well at the same time. You know, that's the entourage effect.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think there is a problem out there with a lot of doctors prescribing high THC flower. I've got one of my best mates has got a son who is. He's been diagnosed with, we've spoken about this guy, he's been diagnosed with, mental health issues. I won't get into all of them, but, and he's on antipsychotics and, Valium, and then he's also on ADHD medication and stuff as well. So he's on this sort of, massive mixture of pharmaceutical drugs, and he's found a doctor that's prescribing him high THC weed, and he's smoking bongs all day, and it's just sent him into complete psychosis.
Yeah,
and that's happening.
Yeah,
that's definitely happening. There's people that are smoking really, really strong weed, and it's not doing them any favors. So that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, look, when I studied pharmacology at university, one of the lecturers said that the difference between a medicine and a poison is the dose. And so, THC does have issues, and I do believe in the entourage effect with CBD, but I also know that high doses of THC don't work for everybody, and that there is documented, evidence of that it can cause this kind of paranoia, and mental health problems for sure.
Yeah. It can exasperate it.
Yeah. CBD doesn't do that at all.
No.
THC does, and so I'm a fan of THC, but only in small doses.
Yeah. And there's also CBN
CBG.
Delta 8, which is completely illegal in Australia. You can't even get that via prescription. Delta 8, if that was to make it out onto the market, it would be an absolute game changer. It is the ultimate sleeping cannabinoid. Like Delta 8 has pretty much zero side effects. It's Delta 8 THC, but it has some of the effects of THC without the crazy head fuck that goes with it, basically. So it's really a pure sedative. And, you know, I've used, Delta 8 gummies to sleep if I'm, having sleep issues. And you have one of them and you sleep for 8 hours, like solid as a rock. It's incredible. And you don't have a hangover or, that sort of, dopey feeling the next day after having too much THC. So it's a shame that that's not on the market, but it's very popular in the United States.
Yeah, so it's still a THC, but because it's Delta 8 and not Delta 9, you don't get the paranoia.
Correct.
But you still get the sedative
it's
effects.
It's an analogue.
Yeah.
And that's why it's illegal.
Right.
They're not letting any analogues in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So speaking about medicines and poisons, you've recently chucked in cigarette smoking.
I have, yeah.
And I've recently taken up nicotine. And we were just chatting about this before we started recording, and I'm actually wearing a little transdermal patch on my wrist of 1 milligram of nicotine.
Yep. And I'm on these bad boys.
You're on the nicotine gum?
Yeah, I'm on the mints.
Yeah, because you're wanting to reduce your dose. So
look, my problem wasn't with nicotine. My problem was with smoke and smoke inhalation. My lungs started packing up. I was smoking cigarettes from the age of 12. My first packet of cigarettes, I remember, was Will's Virginia Slim Size. It was little mini packets, and they were like about 13 cents a pack back then. We used to cash in, cans and bottles that we'd go and collect from people's places, and get our money for them, and then we'd go and buy cigarettes and tear around on our BMX bikes, being absolute fucking terrors.
Wasn't that the brand that was promoted for women? Do you remember you've come a long way, baby?
Yeah, possibly.
To get where you've got today.
Yeah, possibly.
You've got your own cigarette now, baby.
They were the
Virginia
cheapest,
Slims.
Yeah, they were the cheapest cigarettes on the market.
They were promoting them to women because they were more cool if they smoked that brand.
And then I started smoking Long Beach, which was this white and blue packet, which is really sporty looking. I remember. Anyway, but yeah, so I had this relationship with smoking and tobacco. That I've never really stopped. I gave it a break now and then, but I've smoked my whole life. And even though I've, had a life of surfing and, windsurfing and sailing and stand-up paddleboarding and, I've always been, pretty active, but my lungs started to pack up. And I started getting the early signs of emphysema and went and had all my lungs tested, and the doctor that specialises in lung health said to me, if you don't stop smoking now, mate, you're going to be walking around with an oxygen tank by your side in 6 months.
Absolutely, and you'll be dependent on that for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
So emphysema is a disease of the lower airways in the lungs, so the alveoli, which are the small sacs that expand and contract to allow for the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide right at the base of the lungs, they lose their elasticity, and so you can't ventilate your lungs, so you're not getting as much oxygen in and you're not able to get as much CO2 out.
Yep.
And so you become very short of breath, and that's an irreversible condition. The only thing you can do is, at the first sign of emphysema, stop smoking.
Which is what I did.
And my father did that when he was 50. He's now 88, hasn't smoked for 38 years. But he's great, he's fine. And he'd smoked for about 30 years, 2 packs a day. So, yeah, anyone out there who's been smoking a lot and starting to feel a bit breathless, you must quit the cigarettes, or you're going to be hooked up to oxygen. And my uncle died that way. He was hooked up to oxygen for probably the last year or two, and it's not a nice way to go.
No, and it's a slow form of suicide.
Yeah, it is.
You're basically killing yourself. And I think that's one of the reasons why I was struggling so hard to give it up too, because I was going through such a terrible ordeal. I was going through court cases, and, I had sort of personal issues that were really sort of compounding and making my life really difficult. And it made me smoke even more because I was so depressed. It's like...
Well, the actions of nicotine in the brain is that it's a central nervous system stimulant, so it's stimulating. It's also anxiolytic, which means it reduces anxiety. So people who are primarily addicted to smoking is that what they're attempting to do is manage their anxiety and even their depression to an extent because of the central nervous system stimulation. So you might be feeling like crap, feeling a bit stressed out, a bit anxious, you have a cigarette. But even the cigarette, this is why people smoke too, because you're taking time out to have the cigarette. So it's not just the cigarette, the nicotine, it's also, I'm taking a break from my mind, I'm breathing deeply. So sometimes just taking a break and breathing deeply will calm your nervous system down through the parasympathetic nervous system. But nicotine, this is my point. This is why I've started. I haven't smoked cigarettes at all my whole life. Mm-hmm. And 3 months ago, I've just started using nicotine because nicotine is a medicine. Mm-hmm. We have nicotinic receptors in our brain. Mm-hmm. And when those receptors are activated by nicotine, then adrenaline is released. And not only adrenaline, also dopamine. So, but the thing about nicotine is you have to get the dose right. And the way you were taking it, you also got to get the delivery system right. So smoking nicotine...
20 rollers a day.
Yeah. And it's not even the nicotine that's doing the damage, it's all the particulate matter that you're breathing into your lungs.
Yeah, sure. It's the paper and the tar and...
So you're curious as to why I'd be using nicotine?
I am. Yeah, why don't you tell us?
Okay, so it's not for the dopamine or the adrenaline effect. I mean, I can get that other ways, but I watched a podcast recently, and so this guy gave a pretty good case for... So if you had COVID, you got spike protein in your body. And this guy demonstrated that, or postulated that, the spike protein crosses the blood-brain barrier. So what does that mean? So there's a barrier between your blood vessels and your brain, and not everything gets across that barrier. Nicotine does, otherwise you wouldn't feel the high. Mm-hmm. THC does, otherwise you wouldn't feel the high. Mm-hmm. So anything that gets across the blood-brain barrier goes from the bloodstream into the brain itself. Now the spike protein has been demonstrated to cross the blood-brain barrier and into the brain, and once it gets into the brain tissue, it sets up inflammation. Mm-hmm. And so maybe this is what long COVID is all about, is you now have inflammation, cerebral inflammation. Yep. And so this guy I was watching this podcast and listening to him give his case for that, and he talked about symptoms such as brain fog, but also tinnitus, which is the ringing in the ears.
I've had that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I've had brain fog and the tinnitus. I'm like, I've had this tinnitus for about 3 years, mm-hmm. and it was getting worse and getting louder and louder. And people think that tinnitus is a condition of the ear. No, it just sounds like it's in the ear, but it's actually the brain. Mm-hmm. So the ear is just the sensory organ that you think it's coming from there, but it's the inflammation in the brain that's causing the tinnitus.
Yeah, it's like a weird ringing.
Correct.
It's nearly like it's like a vibration, like a ringing vibration. It's
a high pitched frequency that, for me, would get louder when I was stressed, mm-hmm. and the more calm I was, it would almost disappear. But I noticed I'd had this for a few years, and it was getting worse. So I'm like, what am I going to do about this? And this guy was saying that nicotine, which crosses the blood-brain barrier, helps to reduce that inflammation, that cerebral inflammation. So I've been taking 1 milligram, which is like the lowest dose you can get. I buy the nicotine patches, the 7 milligram one. I cut it into 7 pieces, and I stick 1 milligram on and it's absorbed transdermally through the skin, because I don't want to take it into my lungs. And I've noticed that the tinnitus has gone away. And the brain fog is improving. Now, I can't make any claims, and I'm not promoting or selling nicotine. I'm just giving an example. I'm just sharing my experience of what's going on for me. Mm. And so, I'm just using nicotine as a medicine. Are you curious about how working with your shadow can improve your life and your relationships? Every Tuesday night at 6 p.m, I host a confidential live Q&A call where you can ask questions, access resources, and receive personal coaching from me. I have so many people come to me ready to do their shadow work, but they tell me they just can't afford the financial investment of one of my programs. So, to make professional shadow work accessible to as many of you as possible, I've created the Shadow Work Academy. The Academy is an online space where you get instant access to my inspired community of like-minded individuals, doing the work, and taking full responsibility for their lives. You'll have the opportunity to hear other members' stories and share your own. Within the community, you can post your questions, challenges, and breakthroughs, as well as seek professional support and guidance from me personally on the live weekly call. Within the Academy, you'll also find my men's sexual mastery course called the Sexual Samurai and my introductory level shadow work course, Shadowboxing Level 1. Access to the Academy is 100% free until December 24. If you join before then, your access will be free for life.
Quitting for me was incredible, and I think you can actually take credit for having a big part in me quitting tobacco finally. When I started doing the shadowboxing course, which we're going to talk about obviously today, I remember calling you a week in saying, "Fuck, Pete, I'm really struggling. I'm just struggling with the journaling and the concentration and all that." And Pete said, "Pete, you said to me, get back on your ADHD meds," because you knew that a couple of years before I was diagnosed as being quite heavily ADHD. Surprise, surprise. And I took Vyvanse for about 6 months, and I got a lot done, but I didn't really like the way they made me felt. Anyway, I was really struggling when I started this course. So you said to me, go back and, either get on the Dexies or get on something. Just, you need to focus, you need to concentrate, 'cause it's going to be really good for you, this course. Because I was actually thinking about even pulling out. I was really I was never good at homework, put it that way. So I started taking them, and I went down to stay with my best mate Marcus in Melbourne, who's an ex-smoker, and he's on the Nicorette mint. So he's never stopped his relationship with nicotine, which is what we're just talking about, but he doesn't smoke. Anyway, so it was like a perfect storm. I went down there, I started taking the Vyvanse, and I just stopped smoking. And I started on those mints, and I also lost my taste or my want for alcohol when I started taking the ADHD meds. And I went from drinking a bottle of wine every night or sometimes more, and I was a fully functioning alcoholic, basically, and, a chronic smoker, and I stopped. And it timed perfectly with the whole addiction part of the shadow workshop, which I'm sure we'll talk more about. But it was interesting. I don't know whether it was, I think the ADHD meds gave me maybe the power, or they enabled me to be able to make that decision, and that decision was stop. The decision was the right decision, not the wrong decision. And, I've made plenty of wrong decisions in my life. So I stopped, and I didn't like the mints for the first, half day or something, and then I got into them. And, I haven't, I think I've maybe puffed on one joint or something since, but, it's been, 4 months or something, and I haven't had a cigarette, and I don't want them, and I'll be out at a party or, at a pub or whatever, and people will be smoking around me, and I just have no want to reach for a cigarette anymore,
Brilliant.
And also my drinking is just gone from, drinking bottles and bottles of wine every week, and, mezcal and tequila, and now I've sort of rediscovered Guinness, and I have maybe a 6-pack of Guinness a week, and that's it. So I've cut out the daily alcohol, and also completely changed my diet, which is your influence as well. I got into eating mainly meat and a few vegetables, and I've managed to lose 6 kilos in the last 8 weeks.
You've also picked up your exercise.
Yeah, now I'm exercising every day.
Yeah, you were a bit of a standout in that course of the kind of results you produced, and you were struggling. It's interesting about the ADHD meds, and so because there is homework to do and journaling inside that course, and one of the things you were wanting was to deal with addiction, wasn't that one of the things? Yeah, because you were having issues around, how the your relationship with intoxicants was getting in the way of your life in different aspects of your life.
Yeah, and it had been my whole life.
Yeah, and since you've cleaned that up, certain aspects of your life are a lot smoother now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. And I'm somewhat, well, I don't know if it's call it an expert, but I've got a lot of experience in working with people with addiction. Mm-hmm. I started my first job out of nursing school back in 1989, was at a drug and alcohol detox residential facility. My last job in nursing was at the Sanctuary here in Byron Bay, which is the most exclusive or prestigious drug and alcohol treatment centre on the planet. Yes, with Mika, our friend Mika. And so, and you know, both my parents were alcoholics. I've had my own issues with addiction, but I've also treated people or helped be part of a treatment team. I worked in the prisons for 10 years and I was part of the addiction services team inside the prison. And then I've had, like I said, my own issues with addiction. So I understand it, I think, at a fairly deep level. And so it's not surprising to me that when we started engaging together inside that course, that you've had some, made some headway there with dealing with your addiction. Because I take a totally different approach. I use the shadow work approach. And this was one of my complaints about working at the Sanctuary, was that they were very good at getting people off the substances, but they couldn't really keep them off. And so it's one thing to go to a beautiful spa retreat and have all your rewards centres, you know, catered for, and to be outside your normal environment, and you're feeling so good you don't need the coke or the, you know, or the alcohol or the cigarettes or whatever you're trying to get off. But once you go back to your home environment and your normal stresses, if you don't have new tools, then you're going to be in the same problem. And so my coaching approach is to give people tools for how to stay off, and that's partly what I think you got from the program.
Absolutely.
And you might not have got that if you weren't able to focus on the dialogue and the methodology within that course. And so by getting back on your ADD meds, you were able to focus. And
it was the perfect storm. Like I said, it all just worked perfectly.
Yeah, and I've recently started taking dexamphetamine myself. I didn't know I had ADD. I just knew that I was having problems focusing on my business. And I saw a psychiatrist, and that was a very illuminating appointment that I had with a psychiatrist. And he said that basically our brains tend to evolve differently, and that about 50% of the population, their brain tends to evolve towards being interested in things and tasks and ideas. Mm-hmm. And the other 50% of the population, their brain tends to evolve in being interested in people. So I'm way more interested in people than I am in things, tasks and ideas. Mm-hmm. And so when I was, and my whole career has been working with people, nurse, trauma therapist, counsellor, coach.
Shaman.
I won't take that on. There's too much baggage
medicine man.
Too much baggage comes with that. But always working with people, because I can focus on people. And when I'm in a trauma therapy session, I can listen to somebody for 5 hours and not miss a beat of that conversation. However, if you sit me down in front of a computer and I've got, you know, even 1 hour of task-orientated things to do, after 5 minutes, I'm up making a cup of tea. 10 minutes later, I'm watching something on YouTube. So my brain didn't evolve to focus on tasks and things. It evolved to focus on people. So the psychiatrist was informing me of this, and he said, the dexamphetamine is not a cure. We're not treating an illness or a disease. It's just people's brains evolve differently. He said, this is a tool. And when you take this, he said, you'll find that you'll be able to focus on tasks and things. And sure enough, I tried one and I did 10 hours of task and admin orientated chores that day and enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'm the same. The way I would describe the way my brain was working was that it was like this brilliant scrambled mess. You know, I've always been really creative. I've got a million brilliant ideas, but I can never actually get things done. I couldn't finish things off, you know, and I'm still a bit like that, but I'm much better than what I was. But it gave me now that I'm, you know, using the medication, and I don't use it every day either. I'm maybe on 4 days a week, but those 4 days I get a lot more done. and I get things finished, you know. I also it made me have a good look about why we are ADHD, and it seems like there's like an epidemic out there. Like, you know, you talk to people and everyone, so many people I meet now are like, oh, I'm ADHD. And, you know, it was so funny. Gracie, my daughter, was saying that we should do a podcast called Touched by the Tism.
The tism.
The autism.
Oh.
All about the spectrum, because now it's coming out that, you know, so many people are like on the spectrum in one way or another, you know. I suppose the more, you know, science develops, the more we learn about the brain and how the brain works. It's interesting to see, you know, there are so many different conditions that exist out there. But I'm a bit of a believer in Gabor Mate's work, where I believe that ADHD can be caused by childhood trauma. And I think that's probably where I picked it up, because I had a pretty traumatic childhood.
Yeah, so did I, and so do other people I know. I've always wondered about the connection between ADHD and trauma. I think there is a connection. Whether that can be proven or not, or shown or demonstrated, remains to be seen. But yeah. I am curious, did you, because that was one of the other things I wanted you to maybe give a little bit of background, a bit about your life story. And I don't know how much of that you want to share, but when you say you had trauma, I mean, I've spoken about my trauma from childhood quite openly, and I think it can be helpful for people to hear trauma stories, because they're relatable for a lot of people.
Yeah, sure. Firstly, I want to say one thing though, and then I'll go backwards. One of the big things that I brought away from the course wasn't just dealing with addiction. It was actually, I found this card that I've been carrying around in my pocket my whole life, which is, I call it my victim card. And I actually took that card out of my pocket and I burnt it. You know, like I'm not walking around as a victim, which I was my whole life, you know. And, you know, there's a great saying, you know, you're not responsible for what happens to you as a child, but as an adult, you're responsible to fix it. And that's what that course was really good for me. Look, I grew up in the Mornington Peninsula. I was born in 1968. I'm one of six. I'm the middle child. My parents had a very tumultuous and I'd say horrific relationship. My dad wasn't really a present father. He wasn't even there the day I was born. He was playing tennis. My mum was pretty much an orphan. You know, her mum died when she was giving birth to her, and her dad died, I think, before she was 10. She was raised by her uncle and auntie. And as far as I know, my dad was the only relationship with a man that she ever had. And she married him at a young age and, you know, went on and had 6 kids. So she had no real family skills, you know. I'd say, you know, in my family there's a lot of intergenerational trauma, and I also believe that gets carried through as well on both sides. My dad was a bit of a monster, and there's a reason why he was a monster, you know. We've found out quite a few things about him and his childhood and his family that, you know, it's fair to draw conclusions that that's why he turned out the way he did. I grew up, I kind of describe it as a bit of a war zone, really. You know, it was definitely not a great example for a child to see how parents thrive in a relationship. It was, you know, it was disastrous. And, it's had deep effects on my whole family.
Can you see the connection? Sorry to pause you just there for a moment, but because I believe that our intimate relationships as an adult are definitely affected by what we witnessed in terms of the relationship between our parents. Yep. And I know you've struggled in terms of partnerships and intimate relationships, as have I. Now not so much, but I can see how I was never modelled what a good relationship looks like. And so, you know, I struggled most of my life.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I was married to Claire for, I think, 10 years. We were together maybe 11 or 12 years. I've actually got a really great relationship with her still. I love her dearly, and, you know, the feeling's mutual. We've got a 23-year-old daughter, Gracie. And then I was with another woman for 2 years, and that was a very toxic relationship. I've got 2 kids to her. And then I had another relationship with another woman, which wasn't a great relationship. And I took a lot of lessons away from that relationship and the experience of the breakup and what followed.
Well, your 2 recent relationships you described as toxic or dysfunctional, they didn't work. And your parents' relationship didn't work, even though it produced 6 children. It was still a chaotic war zone. Where are you at now in terms of looking at what was going on in me signing up for those other 2 relationships?
Yeah, good question.
That I can now see that. Now that I can see that, I'm not going to venture into a relationship like that again. How are you going to prevent yourself from...
Yeah, good question. So I think the reason why I was attracted to both of those women was that they're both incredibly talented and creative women. So that was, I would say, the big attraction to me. It's not really about the physical for me. It was more, yeah, sure, I like pretty girls, and they were both, pretty girls, or women. But what attracted me to these women was their creativity. And that really gets me going. However, there was, other parts to the relationship that, were incredibly flawed. And what have I learnt? I think a lot. One, I've had a vasectomy, so I can't have any more children. So there'll be no going into another relationship and having kids. But it's funny, I actually went on a date with a girl about 5 or 6 weeks ago. And she said to me halfway through the dinner, she said to me, "I feel like I'm being interviewed." And I said, "Well, actually, I think you are, because I'm really trying to learn from all my mistakes that I've made and my bad choices in my relationships. And if I'm going to get into another relationship with another woman or a business partner or whatever relationship it is, I'm going to make sure that there's boundaries and we both understand what we want and need out of this relationship. And, I'm not going to make the same mistakes."
I love that, because I think some people can make the mistake of, like you fell for these other 2 women because their creativity really attracted you, and for some people it's looks or personality,
it was
whatever.
A bit of both, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, in the old days it was a bit more of a long courting process, and I think there's a reason for that, because that is the interview, rather than just jumping into the sack and then, forming this attachment before you even really get to know the person can, turn out to be quite disastrous for both people down the track.
But going back, so that was my childhood, and then you want me to talk about my work and my life experience?
Yeah.
So what I realised from a very young age is that I'm not good at actually working for people. So I've always managed to create my own work and be a freelance person, and have my own businesses. So I started hairdressing when I was 16, and the only reason I got into hairdressing was because I wanted to be around beautiful women. That was my driving force.
Same reason I got into nursing.
Yeah. So I started hairdressing. I was trained at a salon in South Yarra in Melbourne called FB by this guy called Frank Burgermeister, who was one of the best haircutters in the country. And I picked it up really quickly, and I was naturally good at it. And I worked at FB for 4 years, and then I went on to another salon called Rock Hair and did a year there. And what I loved about the hairdressing wasn't just cutting people's hair and making them feel good. I loved the whole process of creating images and photography and capturing beauty on film, like that. I really got off on that. And also there was all the models, So I got out of the salon as quick as I could and started freelancing as a hairstylist on photo shoots. And back then you had to really know how to do makeup as well. So I had a few friends show me some stuff, and I used to practice on girlfriends, and I basically learnt makeup. But back then there was no YouTube or, you couldn't, do tutorials with the greatest makeup artists in the world, which all the kids can do now. You had to, it was like getting into a secret society. Anyway, I ended up doing pretty well at that. When I was like 22, I think I moved over to Europe. I went and lived in Spain for 2 years, which was an interesting experience. That was good for me in some ways and not great for my health. You know, there was a lot of drugs and partying over there. And then I moved back to Australia, and I had a pretty good career in Sydney. You know, I used to work for Elle magazine and Marie Claire and Vogue, and I think I had my first Vogue cover when I was like 24. Actually, it was my only Vogue cover, but I did get a lot of other covers. But yeah, I did well. I also, one problem for me was when I was in Spain, I discovered heroin. That was a bit of a monkey on my back for a while. And when I was in Sydney, working for, you know, the top magazines and, you know, David Jones and Myer and, you know, all the big advertising companies, I was a functioning addict back then. I was, you know, shooting up on the job. And, you know, word got out, you know, and people stopped kind of working with me a bit. So I had to get out of there. So I moved, I went back to Europe for a bit, and then I moved to the States. I moved to Miami. I did a year in Miami, still partying a bit and using occasionally, but not like what I was. And then I picked up a couple of great clients in Miami and moved to New York City. And I moved to New York in, I think it was 95, late 90, yeah, the winter of, it was like Christmas time, 95. I moved into New York. It was the biggest blizzard they'd had in like 30 years.
Freezing.
It was fucking freezing. And I'd been on the beach all year in Miami, you know, and all I had was shorts and T-shirts. So that was a bit of a wake up. And I moved into it was like a one-room bed sit with two other guys.
For $5,000 or something.
Oh, it was hilarious. You know, I was on the couch. It was really funny. Anyway, fortunately, though, I picked up these really good money clients in Miami. One company in particular was called J. Crew. This girl called Kelly Hill really took a shine to me and loved working with me. So I was working with them a lot. And, you know, back then I was making $1,000 US a day, and I was doing a lot of work. So I was making good money. I went and bought myself the first thing I spent my money on in New York, I spent $6,000 on a parrot.
A macaw.
I bought myself a scarlet macaw, this baby scarlet macaw. I called him Chicken, and I used to take him everywhere with me in New York. So I was kind of famous in New York for years. I was the guy that always had this parrot on his shoulder. I used to take it to shoots with me and everything.
You would look like a right pirate. You still look a bit like a pirate.
Yeah, I still am a pirate.
You are a pirate.
Yeah. Nirvana and I talk about that a lot, actually. He's my little pirate. I'm Daddy Pirate. Anyway, New York. Did really well in New York, actually. You know, I worked with some great photographers and had a really high-flying jet set kind of groovy crowd, hanging out with all the, you know, supermodels and rock stars and all that crowd. And then I met Claire. I think I'd been living in New York for about a year by the time I met Claire. And she was 21, I was 28. And we were together for a year, I think, and we got married. And one thing that Claire was a model, and she was doing really well, and I was doing well. Together we were both making really good money. We ended up getting an apartment together in New York, and then we both had this love affair for Bali. So I'd always gone to Bali every year since I was 18. That was my first holiday away without family. And so I'd always gone back to Bali, and I just loved the place. You know, Bali back then was wild. And Claire had just been to Bali, and she loved it as well. Anyway, so within 2 years of being with Claire, we'd been to Bali a couple of times, and she'd met all my crew there, and she knew a few people that I knew from England. And we ended up buying property there and building a house. And it was when the Indonesian rupiah crashed, and we were earning US dollars. So we went down there with, you know, like, $150,000, and you know, it went a long way back then. You know, like you could buy a car for $5,000, you could buy a motorbike for $500. We ended up leasing land. I think for 20 years it was like $25,000 for this land, and we built this fabulous house, and we were traveling between Bali and New York, and eventually we just couldn't do New York anymore. You know, we'd become, you know, Bali people. And then I kind of started weaning off hair and makeup, and I started designing clothes, and I had this idea to make this brand called Buddhist Punk, which I did it with these two brothers called Gary and Darren Collins and another guy called Rupert from the UK. And it was my idea, my concept, my baby, and the Collins brothers did the production and the sales, and Rupert sort of backed my end of it. But that brand took off like a rocket. And it was within 3 years, we're in 450 stores around the world. And that was pre-digital social media and everything. And
wow.
God, if it had been later on. But all the superstars were wearing our clothes, you know, like Beckham. And, you know, I'd get a call from a mate saying, I just sat next to so-and-so on first class and he was decked out in your clothes. And, you know, Madonna and all these people started wearing it. And it really took off. So we're in some of the best stores in the world. And I became, you know, known as not so much the hair and makeup artist. I was that famous designer from Buddhist Punk. Ended up doing a big show at New York Fashion Week, which was, the reviews were incredible. Basically, I think American Vogue said that I hijacked Fashion Week that year. And we ended up throwing this massive party, and I had all these celebrities in my show, and I had the star-studded lineup of an audience, and it was amazing. And that was about 5 years after we'd started the brand. That was like the height of its success. And then I got into a bit of a fallout with the partners about money and finances. And unfortunately, I was quite immature and I didn't really understand business. And those guys actually had never really had business partners either. They were always used to doing their own thing. And I basically asked for more money, and I, you know, audited the business, and it didn't go down very well, and I ended up getting booted out of my own label, which was a huge hit for me. You know, that really got me down.
Did you spiral into a depression after that, or not necessarily?
I was okay. I was just adamant about keeping going. And then I met a guy called Dare Jennings who was a great guy and a bit of a mentor to me. Dare was the guy that started Mambo and Deus Ex Machina. And Dare approached me in Bali. He'd just built in Bali as well. He was just up the road from me. And he just sold Mambo to the Gazelle Group. And they were struggling with it. He said to me, do you want to come and take over Mambo and become the creative director down there? Which in theory was a great idea, but, you know, going back to I'm not very good at working for people. Anyway, they paid me a shit ton of money, and I found myself working in an office every day, which wasn't great for me. And because other than having staff in Bali, which, you know, you can kind of do whatever you want there, you know, I was kind of, I was given a few warnings on the way I, you know, spoke with people and stuff like, you know,
Okay.
I was the creative director of about 25, 30 staff. Anyway, so I was on a trip to LA. We were doing a buying trip. Back then, that's what brands did. They went around and bought everybody else's stuff and made their own versions of it. And we were on a buying trip in LA, and I caught up with this old mate of mine called Cristiano Digier. He was an interesting cat. He was actually the first guy that helped me sample Buddhist Punk back in Bali. He was this French guy. He'd left Bali. He got caught with coke in Bali, did a year in jail, got kicked out of Bali, moved back to Los Angeles with not a penny in his pocket. And within 2 years, he was living in a mansion in Beverly Hills. How did he do it? He started working with a company called Von Dutch, and he did their trucker hats. And his trucker hats, he did a deal with them where he got a percentage of sales, and those trucker hats took off. They were the most popular hats in the world, and he made millions and millions. And Von Dutch didn't want to pay him because they realised that the deal he'd cut with them, they had to give him like 4 or 5 million a year. And they said, no way. So he said, all right, fuck you guys. And he started Ed Hardy. And Ed Hardy was like the ultimate LA sort of trashy 90s brand. And that was 10 times bigger than Von Dutch. Anyway, ran into Christian when I was in LA, and Christian said to me, what are you doing working for this brand? Fuck these guys, come and work for me. And I said, oh, well, they're paying me a lot of money. He said, how much? And he said, I'll pay you more. So he said, I want you to start my new line, Cristiano Digier, my like really exclusive line, sorry. So I went back to Sydney, spoke to Claire about it. We were living in Tamarama. I said, look, I've been offered this job in LA. What do you think? She said, fuck yeah, let's go. So we packed up. I left Mambo, and they weren't very happy. Dare was pretty upset too. I kind of let him down, and I actually feel quite bad about that. And Dare, I'm sorry, and I love you very much, and I do appreciate you helping me. Thank you. So I went to LA, and oh man, it was fucking crazy. It was, the rappers and actors and movie stars, and I worked with Mickey Rourke on a project designing all these belts for him for this film that he was doing with Quentin Tarantino. I actually went for lunch with Quentin Tarantino and Mickey Rourke, ended up in a strip joint afterwards. That was a fucking funny story. But met a lot of people and everything, but dealing with Christian, who had the biggest ego of anyone you've ever met in your fucking life, was just way too much for me. And everyone was smoking weed. And that was when you could get legal weed in California. And it was fucking strong, man. Everyone was just off their heads the whole time. And I found it was quite a toxic working environment, and I only lasted 6 months there. Packed up, moved back to Bali, and then I started my own brand, which was Nicholas X Morley. That for about 3 years, and then I stopped doing that, and then I went into production and started manufacturing for other brands. Go from there anyway, and then I ended up moving back to Australia, and it all went to shit. And Gracie was living with us at the time. Gracie and I packed up and moved to Byron Bay.
Yeah, well, that's a great.
And then the medicine started. Then the journey with Luke.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you took us from the start of your career to your career here in Byron, which is when I met you.
Yep.
About, I don't know, 12, somewhere between 8 and 12 years ago, we probably met.
Yep.
So I've definitely noticed the transformation in you because I've known you a while, but over the last year or so, it's been some significant changes. And one of the things that I want to speak about is you mentioned about, when you were the creative director for 20 or 30 staff, and that, they pulled you in and said they didn't like the way you spoke to some of the staff or whatever. And I know you had a bit of a reputation here because I know some of your staff who you worked with in one of your industries here, and they would come to me and, comment about how they're being spoken to. Yep. And so what can you say about that? Because, in the shadow work course you've just done, you've become, like, in my estimation or view, a lot softer. But before you had this kind of hard edge to you, and you would get triggered, and you could get aggressive or angry and maybe even intimidating. Yep. Is that correct? Accurate to say that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
What was that about? And what did you discover that made the change? Because that's quite a significant change in a personality, from going to being quite aggressive and intimidating to being really quite soft and sweet.
Look, because I grew up being physically abused as a kid, I used to get beaten, and there was a lot of situations that I think made me the way that I was. Not that I'm trying to use that as an excuse, because it's
an explanation.
It's an explanation.
Yeah.
I'm owning the fact that I had a really bad temper, and I struggled. I struggled being a team player. I think I was, it was like my way or the highway. But at the same time, running that business, running Greenlight, so Greenlight was a clinic that I started, and I owned it, and it ended up being like the biggest medicinal cannabis consultancy in Australia, we had about 10,000 patients. Yeah, I had like 12 full-time staff. And there was always a lot of stress around the business because it was basically an illegal business. I mean, we were paying tax and I was paying super, and, you know, I had work contracts with my staff and everything. I was running it like a legitimate business, but really it was a black market business. And at the end of the day, if the authorities did want to come down and crack down on me, you know, I probably would have been in quite a bit of trouble. I probably could get into trouble now if even talking about it. I don't know. But there was definitely the pressures of that. But also, I think looking back at the relationships that I had with my staff, there was, you know, it's like interviewing the new partner. It was like there was parts of my staff, there were certain aspects of some of my staff that, and I know who you're talking about, that they definitely had major issues as well.
Sure.
And there was a lot of triggering and but
that's a good point. I think I know where some of that comes from. So I've studied personality, I guess, categorization. It's called social styles. You can look it up. And so there's really only 4 social styles. We're social beings, humans, and we have a style of how we socialize. And this divides people into basically 4 different categories based on how assertive you are and how emotive you are. And in that framework, you would be classified as what they call an expressive, whereas I'm amiable. Now, expressives, and most artists and creatives are expressive in their social style. And so people who are expressive, when they're under stress, their default mode or their weakness is that they'll attack. And so you're running a business that's not strictly legal, you've got 12 staff, you have to pay superannuation, a lot of pressure, a lot of stress in that industry. So at your weakest, which is when you're at the most stressed, your default is to attack. Would you say does that fit?
Yeah, I would say so. I was also going through, you know, problems with my relationship as well. You know, that wasn't, you know, I think we must have broken up 3 or 4 times.
Would you do that in your relationship if you were stressed? Would you not physically attack? I'm talking about attack a person's character. Yeah. So was that a feature of your relationships? Would you, if you were stressed out, you would attack them?
Yeah, I used to gaslight and I could be verbally abusive.
Yeah. And so what's changed for you recently? Because you recognise that you could be that way, and because now it's like there's this new commitment in you because you've owned that part of yourself, and I see that you're managing that because it's almost like that part of you's gone, or it's there but you're in control of it.
Yeah, I'm in control of it. I now treat people how I would like to be treated. You know, I try to be as authentic as I possibly can. I now avoid conflict at all costs.
Do you avoid it, or do you just handle it differently?
Bit of both.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is, I guess, the question that I'm really asking. So that, because you can't escape conflict, because life is conflict if it's anything. So before you had a temper and you would attack, so you're still going to have conflict in your life. What are you doing differently now? So what you're doing differently now is you're treating that person how you'd like to be treated rather than attacking them.
I'm doing that, but I'm also taking much better care of myself. So I view myself differently. You know, before I was, you know, slowly killing myself, whether it was booze or cigarettes or drugs or whatever it was. I wasn't in control of myself, right? So now I feel like I've got control of my life for the first time.
Oh, wow. For the first time.
I would say,
After so many requests to create a more affordable alternative to shadowboxing mastery, I've created Shadowboxing Level 1, a 5-week introductory program focused on the foundations of shadow work and how to apply this in any area of your life. Whether you're a therapist, a coach, or just someone with a passion for self-development, this program will equip you with the principles, the tools, and the know-how to achieve life-changing breakthroughs for yourself and or your clients on a daily basis. Using my proven method, Shadowboxing Level 1 Teachers use the skills to create satisfying and lasting intimate relationships, reconcile past traumas, improve health and well-being, manage addictive behaviour patterns, and much more. Head to my website at isaiahcoaching.com or check out the show notes to find out more. You know where I want to go now? I was going to start with this, and we don't have to talk about it if you don't want, but I'm always curious about this. So the topic of narcissism, because it's quite a, it seems to be thrown around a lot more.
The N-word.
That label, yeah, the N-word. And I've certainly encountered some narcissism in my life, both in my personal life, but also in my professional life as a coach. And I also do relationship coaching and therapy. And sometimes I've had couples where one of the person is a legitimate narcissist and the other person's the poor victim that's being gaslit and that. And so interestingly, because early on when I had just met you, hadn't known you a long time, your name came up and I was with this person. They says, he's a narcissist. And I was like, what? And because that's not how I saw you at all.
Who was that?
I'm not going to say.
Boy or girl?
I'm not going to say. But I valued their opinion enough because they're a professional person, However, it didn't ring true with me. I'm like, well, I wonder why they think that. And I just parked that. And for me, you're not a narcissist at all. You wouldn't be having this conversation if you were. You wouldn't care so much about other people. You wouldn't show up to a course called shadowboxing to reveal all the skeletons in your closet. You wouldn't be acknowledging your weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Narcissists just don't do that. Sure, you've been here singing your praises and celebrating your wins, and some people go, my God, that's a bit grandiose, but I don't think it is. I think we should celebrate our wins. And so, and to some extent, we may all have some symptoms or traits of narcissism.
Absolutely. Sure we do.
Can I be a bit grandiose sometimes? Sure. Can I be a bit controlling? Absolutely. But I'm not a narcissist, and I don't think you are either. But I've encountered narcissists, and you and I have encountered the same narcissists. And so I think I just want to have a bit of a conversation about that to maybe just shine a light on what we think are the traits of a true narcissist as opposed to somebody who may be a bit arrogant or grandiose at times, or maybe a bit aggressive or have a bad temper at times, like yourself and like myself. So you had an encounter with a narcissist where I think you were in business arrangement.
Yep.
And outside of that business arrangement, you came off second best.
That's putting it mildly.
Yeah, and that one of the traits of this particular person is that they were quite charming, quite generous, and but that also fits certain types of narcissists where in the beginning they call it love bombing, where they just show up and are very generous and
That's
very
exactly
affirming and acknowledging and telling you how amazing you are and singing your praises, blowing smoke up your ass and all the rest of it, and being very generous. And that's how they win you over. But it doesn't take long, apparently, before the tables turn and it's all about criticising and, focusing on your shortcomings. And at some extent, they showed their hand and you were aware. And, at the same time, this guy was actually a housemate of mine. And I didn't see it coming. And, so narcissists can be very covert in the way they operate. And I like to consider myself a reasonable judge of character, but I was fooled by that particular person.
We all were.
Yeah.
And I think he'd had a few of us in his sights for quite a while. And his long-term plan was to steal as much money from us that he could and to create as much havoc that he could.
He was quite successful at it.
He was very successful. I lost everything, financially, between that and my family law court case. I got completely cleaned out to the point where I lost my business, my life savings, and I'm starting from scratch again.
Yeah.
Which is okay.
Yeah, you're a survivor. And what I love about this, because we had that conversation you said earlier about as a child you can be a victim, as an adult you're responsible for, because you can say, I'm a victim of this narcissist, but really that's such a disempowering context in how to view yourself. And really you're a survivor of this narcissist, not a victim of him. Yeah. And because you will survive and you'll go on to thrive again because you're creative and generative.
I already am. I've got a few great things in the pipes.
Yeah. And this guy doesn't have a creative bone in his body other than creating havoc and mayhem. Yeah. And, and he ran off with money, and I think he even tried to abduct someone's child.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that, and then another interesting thing about a narcissist is, and this is in my experience, is that, and particularly if they're in a relationship, they will call their partner a narcissist, and that's a way of taking the spotlight off them and actually gaslighting their partner. Because what the narcissist playbook is that they want to dominate and win, so they've got to crush your spirit and your character. And the way they do that is by getting you on side first, by love bombing you, and then criticising the hell out of you, blaming you for everything. They'll even do things like they'll have said something and you'll say, well, you said this, and they'll just go, I did not say that. So just blatantly dismissive. Gaslight. Yes. And it's designed to wear you down over time so that you get lost and don't even know who you are, and you become quite ineffective, and then they can dominate and manipulate you. And I've seen this in relationships where I've worked with couples, and the moment it becomes clear one of the persons in the room is a narcissist, I'll focus on that person and I'll attempt to hold them to account for their behaviour. They don't come back for the next session after that because I expose the incongruence or the devious or the deceit in them. And once they know I know what they're up to, they don't come back, and I basically spend the rest of the sessions helping the partner put their life back together, including their mental health. Yeah. And so, being a victim of a narcissist, and I've worked with quite a few people who are, and also people who are the children of narcissists. Yeah. And so there are narcissists out there, and
for sure. So my dad for sure was a narcissist.
Yeah, we've talked about that.
Yeah, he was a shocker. But looking at a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, when all of that went down with He Who Shall Not Be Named and also She Who Shall Not Be Named, I was basically under attack from two people at the same time. One was stealing everything and the other one was hell-bent on destroying my life. And she'd made it very clear and told friends of ours that she was going to destroy me, my life and my business. And even dedicated her social media page to surviving a narcissistic relationship. And I just think, well, that's sort of the pot calling the kettle black there.
Another common thing with narcissists in their playbook is they love litigation.
Yeah, well,
because it's a game.
Well, there you go. There's two of them. You know? And it was all at the same time. It was like this. It was just all my ships came. All ships came into the port at once for me, and it was the hardest time of my life.
It was your Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, I'd say the last 3 years are the worst 3 years of my existence. But, I'm 56 now. I'm feeling the best I've felt in a long time, and I'm completely optimistic that I can, get my life back on track and get things going. I already am, I'm a much happier and better person than I was 3 years ago. And even though my bank account isn't looking like it used to, I'm incredibly resilient and hardworking, and I know that I've got everything that I need to restart my life, and that's where I'm heading.
And that's what you're up to. And I've known you that whole 3 years, and we've been quite closely connected through that 3 years.
And helped me a lot.
Yeah, well, I've witnessed and watched your fall and rise, and admired, every step along the way. And, where I can, and when you've asked, I've supported you, but I can't take too much of the credit. I think you certainly get all the credit and, most of the credit. And so what I love to do is I'm a coach primarily, but I use working with the shadow as the tool, because I've discovered that gets the biggest results in the shortest amount of time and the biggest transformation. And I remember, what was it, 12, maybe about 4 or 5 months ago, I asked you, hey, Nick, do you want to come and do my shadow work course? And what at that point in time, did you know what I was asking you to come and do? And what was it that had you say yes? Because I did notice quite a significant transformation in you during those 3 months. And so what was going on in your head?
So another friend of mine that I'd introduce you to was a guy called David. I'd known David for a long time, and he did the course. And David's had a similar career to me in the fashion industry, and he also has right through his life had issues with addiction. And he did your course, and I introduced him to you.
Yeah.
And he got so much out of it. And I remember him giving me feedback and telling me how much he was loving it and how good it was for him. In fact, I've got to give him a call one of these days.
Yeah.
And so that sort of lit a fire in me. And then when you said to me, look, I think you really need to do this. And I was clearly struggling. It was, at the end of my court case had just finished in family law. And I didn't get the results that I wanted, and I had to find the strength to deal with the outcome of that, and I knew that I needed help. So I was basically, what have I got to lose?
Right.
There's only things to gain. And like I said, I've spent my whole life walking around with this fucking victim card in my pocket, and I'd also, looking at my relationships with my children and with some close friends, I knew I had work to do. I knew I couldn't continue living the way I was living, whether it be my intake of, toxins or the way I thought about people, the way I viewed myself, everything at all. I needed to rewire myself.
Had you ever had therapy before that? Any kind of therapy? And you also, I know, have experimented with psychedelic plant medicines as part of your healing.
A lot.
Yeah. And I think you made a comment that you thought that the course that you did with me was, what do you say, better than 10?
Better than 10 ayahuasca ceremonies. So, we've had this conversation. So I think I had my first ayahuasca ceremony about 25 years ago in Bali with a little Shipibo shaman, and I got into it there. But from a very, very young age, I've been reading about shamanic practice, and I've always been fascinated with Native American Indians and indigenous cultures and spirituality. So that sort of led me down that path of psychedelics, and I worked a lot with ayahuasca, LSD, 5-MeO-DMT, psilocybin. So I was, quite experienced and very into putting myself in a very altered state.
Yeah.
And that state would be something that most people would be terrified of, where I felt really comfortable being in a very altered state, Saying that, my issue with plant medicine and psychedelic therapy is that the most important part of it is learning how to integrate the lessons that you get whilst you're in this altered state. And that altered state can be very, very tricky, and it can be very confronting. It can also be incredibly joyous. Like, I've had some of the most beautiful nights of my life on ayahuasca, and I've had probably some of the most horrific nights of my life on it. Same thing with LSD. LSD can go the wrong way. I think doing this course ripped my mask off. That's what psychedelics do. Yeah. They take your mask off. But because this course was over 12 weeks, the process is a lot more gentle, right? Because drinking ayahuasca or taking large doses of psilocybin or LSD is like getting clobbered over the head, right? Yeah. It really is.
It is.
So the gentleness of this course was far more therapeutic and beneficial to me than any ayahuasca ceremony I've ever done. In fact, I don't think I'd go rushing back into any more psychedelic therapy. Now I feel like I'm done with it. Maybe one more ayahuasca ceremony to say goodbye, but it's not something that I feel called to anymore.
Yeah, that metaphor of the mask is, I think, the perfect metaphor, because that was my experience.
It's actually your metaphor. I think I took that from you.
Well, it's not mine. I mean, I think kind of Jung, I think, can take the credit for that. But it's psychedelics show you that you're not the version of yourself that you're selling to the world.
Yep.
That there's way more to you than your persona. And, you know, and rightfully so, I think that one of the pitfalls or problems with psychedelic journeys is that how do you integrate that experience? Well, if you take the mask off, what's revealed behind the mask is all those bits of you that you're not pleased about or that you've been denying or rejecting, and that's what, you know, is referred to as the shadow.
Yep.
And so my course is basically a course of shadow integration. So how do I take those parts of self that I've rejected and not owning anymore, and how do I integrate them into a wholesome personality? So in my estimation, psychedelic integration is the same as shadow integration. And basically, it's been the reason why I designed the course the way it is, because not everybody can do psychedelics. Some people should steer the hell away from them.
Absolutely.
But everybody would benefit from, well, I don't know if that's true. Most people would benefit from integrating the unowned parts of self. That's what I think. You become more empowered, more authentic. I mean, you're saying you're a better version, more authentic version of yourself. You seem like you're more empowered. You've thrown the victim away. You're dealing with your addictions better. You're dealing with your temper a lot better. So, and I think that's come from you examining parts of yourself that we don't normally look at, like the skeletons in the closet or the things that, yeah, we just avoid, basically. So, and you were great. Like, I thought you, the people on the course also loved your raw vulnerability, because I think from day one you just opened up and just, you know, there was no filter. It was just all coming out, and
we were there to do the work.
Yeah, you weren't there to pussyfoot around. Let's rip the Band-Aid off.
Yeah, let's fucking tear it right off.
And it's probably why you got as big a result as you did, because you were there to play a big game.
Yeah. I think Blondie did too.
Yeah, yeah. She's doing great.
She's doing great.
Yeah, she's so much raw and more vulnerable, but in other ways more authentic and empowered, and because she had a real facade, you know, and we all do to some extent. You know, we try and.
But before you asked me if I've done therapy, I believe that doing that course was far better than any therapy that I've ever done as well. Far better, and I think for the fact that the way that you've put the course together, where you're going through this journey with 8 people, it's amazing because you're listening and learning from other people's stories as well. And a lot of that can ring home to you. You know, I remember hearing other people talking about certain situations in their life, and that triggered me to think about other experience that I'd had in my life. So it's kind of this domino effect, which is really good. I don't know whether you considered that when you were putting that course together, but I do believe that doing the course as a group would be far more beneficial to people than just doing it on their own.
Yeah, I kind of discovered that, I guess, kind of by accident or partially by design, because I did want the group to be small enough that I could pay individual attention to people. And so...
Which you did.
Yeah, so I had to limit it to 8 people. I didn't want 100 people on there because I didn't think that was people were going to get as big a result. And then I did notice a couple of things. The thing that really surprised me but also inspired me was that within a week or two there was like a vibe of family, because people are just revealing stuff sometimes that they haven't revealed to anybody, not their partner, not their priest or rabbi, not their therapist. Yeah, so you revealed some things for the first time, which is pretty brave, but we did set up agreements around privacy and confidentiality. And again, I also screen people. I don't just let anybody into the course, and people have to be committed. And then there was this kind of dynamic that happened where you're all there for the same reason, because you're wanting to deal with the parts of your life that aren't working, and you were all willing to go there, and that created some like camaraderie or strong feelings between you, and sharing those stories. And I saw the value and the benefit in that straight away. And I was aware that quite often some of the biggest breakthroughs that the people were having wasn't when I was working with them one-to-one, but when they were in the group. Yeah, listening to someone else's story. I did notice that dynamic. And so, yeah, it's working. I'm still at pretty much the infant stage of building this enterprise of shadow work, and I'm starting a shadow work academy that's launching soon, and I will be promoting this. We mentioned therapy, and you were saying that you found this as effective, if not more effective than therapy, and I'm actually going to promote my shadow work course to therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, counsellors, coaches, people who are already working with people.
Yeah.
Because if you're only working with what the person already knows about themselves, you're only working with maximum half the person, because in shadow work we work with the other stuff, the stuff that's hidden, the stuff about yourself that you don't know or you haven't revealed yet.
Yep.
And that's why I think it does get such good results. And so...
but you're also opening a can of worms when you start it. And that can's open for 12 weeks. When you go to therapy, you turn up, you spill your guts, she listens or he listens, they give you some advice, you walk away, and you go back and see him in 2 weeks, and you kind of just put it to rest. But with the shadow workshop, because you're constantly journaling, it's in your mind. It's, there's no escaping it. You've got to prepare yourself for your next week's meeting. You've got to, the homework that you get keeps you engaged. I couldn't recommend it enough. I mean, I know you invited me on here today to talk about it and to talk about a bunch of things, but if there's one gift that I could give to my, extended friends and family and loved ones, is if you really want to get to the bottom of what is holding you back in life, then this is a really good course to do.
That's why I continue to do this. I haven't made a penny out of this. I've been at this for 2 years now.
One day.
I know. And I still haven't paid myself. I haven't taken a wage in 2 years. Or, my team get paid because they do all the real work. I just show up and, do what I love to do, yeah. But I'm committed. I'm all in. And that you were committed. And you said at one point you felt like maybe stopping or giving up. And that's not uncommon, because when you face your shadow, it's like it's a bit confronting.
It's not pretty.
You want to run from it again. You're like, what have I done? I've opened Pandora's box. I've let the genie out the bottle. And I can't get the genie back in, but that's good. But then you have to deal with the genie.
I'm dealing with that genie every day.
Yeah, and then the other part about it is, and I'm aware of this because I've been doing my own shadow work for about a decade, and I recommit every day to facing the skeletons in my closet. And it's an ongoing commitment.
Totally.
So in the Northern Rivers here, this area that we live in, the Northern Rivers, I think it's kind of known nationally, but maybe even internationally, as a place to come for healing.
Yep.
And a place to do work. And there's a plethora of different modalities here and different ways you can...
Throw a rock and you'll hit a shaman.
That's right. That's Throw a blanket and it'll cover 9 of them. Yeah. And that's why I resist your... label of shaman. It's too tricky. I've certainly worked with plant medicine a lot.
Served it.
And I've even served it overseas. Yeah. I've got some stories to tell. That's...
Maybe we could do a whole other podcast.
We will on that. But what I wanted to talk about was like what I call the kind of the cult of ayahuasca.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is that some of the people that I've met that work in, or I don't know if work's the right word, but see themselves as shamans. Facilitators. But I think they're not necessarily narcissists, but they certainly get captured by the adoration of the group.
Yeah, it's the God complex.
Yeah, the Messiah complex. And I saw that early on,
The guru complex.
The guru complex. And I even saw the temptation for that in me, you know, when I was overseas and serving the medicine, I get to be the shaman. I'm like, not much ego in that. What could possibly go wrong?
It's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
There's actually a really good book I read years ago called Feet of Clay, which is a study of gurus and shamans, which is a really interesting read. Talks about from Gandhi to Gurdjieff to Bhagwan Rajneesh. It's a really interesting book. But I know what you're saying, and goes back to what we were talking about. Pouring the medicine, brewing the medicine, pouring the medicine is that much of it.
Oh, yeah.
The big part of it is helping people actually understand what they've experienced. And how can you do that if you've just poured medicine for 25 people? And, you know, like everyone needs a whole day or 2 days of therapy or coaching so that they can leave that ceremony with the tools to understand what they've been through, what that experience was, because it can be like mind-shattering. And that's, to me, that's not happening. You know, people are just giving you the cup, giving you the experience, and then letting you swim around in this life confusion afterwards.
Yeah, I guess my biggest criticism of the people that, you know, are serving the medicine is, and I know some of them, I've met a few of them, and my criticism would be the ones I know, I can't really say that they strike me as someone who's actually done their shadow work.
No.
And so therefore when people ask me, who should I go and have a psychedelic experience with, I can't really name any. There's one guy who I think has done his shadow work, and he's probably the only legitimate guy, and I think he works mostly in Bali.
Yeah, I know a guy. I know a guy here that I would say that, in fact, I've been wanting to connect you to. I feel like he's a safe place. But just these big groups too, like I really, you know, I know that I think a lot of it's money driven.
Oh yeah,
you know,
money and ego.
Yeah, money and ego. $300 to, you know, or $1,000 for a weekend, and you've got, you know, 25 or 30 people. Do the maths. That's a lot of fucking money, you know. And things do go wrong, and things have gone wrong up here. You know, there's been a couple of deaths at ceremonies, not from ayahuasca, but from Cambo. But you know, that's all been part of it, and it's a bit of a stain on the community. You know, there's not really enough duty of care and responsibility going out there. Like, this is, you know, it's powerful stuff, you know, and it can be very dangerous. I know a couple of people that have had full psychotic episodes that have ended up in hospital having major breakdowns after psychedelic therapy. Like, it's really fucked them up.
I've been working for the last 12 months with a guy who he had some pretty serious mental health issues for about the last 8 years. He ate a space cake in Amsterdam. He had a choice between the medium strength one or the high strength one, and so very high strength THC.
Triggered him.
Yeah, he went into a deeply dissociative state and pretty much paralysed him for 7 years. He couldn't really be in a relationship, couldn't hold down a job. He did manage to get a degree at a university, but that was the most he could manage. And I've worked with him over the last 12 months, and just recently he's been able to reintegrate himself after disintegrating himself in that experience. And I had a similar experience myself with ayahuasca, where I kind of went into a dissociative state for a few years and had to put myself back together. And
and that was old, mate.
Yeah, exactly. We'll save that for another podcast. I'm not promoting, nor would I ever promote psychedelics to anybody, nor should I say they should or shouldn't do them.
No, there's a lot of dangers.
Yeah.
Also ketamine too. You know, ketamine's become the big thing out there at the moment. You know, it's become this really acceptable social drug. You know, it's like the pixie dust. It's, you know, instead of people doing coke, now they're doing ketamine at parties and stuff. Yeah, I've seen a few friends lose their shit on that as well.
Well, that's basically a dissociative anaesthetic.
It's big time.
So you will dissociate, and dissociation is not. It's like when you're not in your own body, and you feel like your spirit's left your body, and you're kind of half in and half out, and you start having symptoms like depersonalization, derealization, where you feel like you're in a movie and you're a character and nothing really feels real. So it's a very...
It can send you mad.
Yeah, it can. Yeah. And I don't think people should be using ketamine. Ketamine's a wonderful painkiller. It has its uses in the emergency department. I've used it in the emergency department as a nurse.
Great in the battlefield.
Yeah, exactly. But as psychedelic therapy, there are some studies showing that I think certain low doses of ketamine are getting some results with depression, but I've heard that over time the depression comes back. So I think the jury's still out on whether ketamine is useful for depression. But then, shadow work's good for depression too, isn't it? I think we'll leave it there.
It's all about the shadow. I just want to say thank you to you for everything that you've done for me and also what you do for the community around here. I've sent a lot of people to you for help and you've always shown up and you've done good work, Pete. And I appreciate it.
Thanks, Nick. I love you too, brother.
I love you very much, mate.
Cheers, man.